veldig bra I går.
Nå vi på opptatten.
Ja. Good morning. It's great to be back in Oslo and to be able to chair a meeting of the NATO foreign ministers here at the Oslo City Hall. We have a quite extensive agenda where we will address several issues as we prepare for the upcoming Vilnius summit in July in Vilnius, and not least we will discuss how to step up and sustain our support for Ukraine. Over the last months, NATO allies and partners have provided unprecedented level of support to Ukraine, helping them to retake and liberate Ukrainian territory. We will also discuss Ukraine's membership aspirations, and all allies agree that the NATO's door is open for new members. All allies also agree that Ukraine will become a member of the alliance, and all allies agree that it is for the NATO allies and Ukraine to decide when Ukraine becomes a member. It's not for Moscow to have a veto against NATO enlargement. But most importantly, all allies agree that the most urgent and important task now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation. President Putin, Russia must not win this war. We need to ensure that Ukraine prevails after this war. And when the war ends, we need to ensure that history doesn't repeat itself, that this pattern of Russian aggression against Ukraine really stops. And therefore we need to have in place frameworks to provide guarantees for Ukrainian security after the end of the war, so history doesn't repeat itself. We will also discuss other issues, including deterrence and defense, where we will make new important decisions at the Vilnius summit. And of course this builds on the big adaptation that has taken place in NATO since 2014, where we implemented the biggest reinforcement of our collective defense in a generation. And part of that will also be to address the need for increased defense spending. Meaning that I expect that when the leaders meet, and also one of the issues that will be discussed here today, we will make sure that 2% of GDP for defense is not a ceiling, something we strive towards, but it will be a floor, a minimum for what is needed to meet obligations as a NATO ally. We'll also address how to further strengthen our partnership with the Indo-Pacific partners, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, South Korea. And then also expect many allies to express strong support for Sweden becoming a full member of the alliance as soon as possible. I spoke with President Erdogan earlier this week, and again I always highlight the importance of making progress on the accession of Sweden, and I will also travel to Ankara in the near future to continue to address how we can ensure the fastest possible accession of Sweden. And with that, I'm ready to take your questions.
VG Norway, how will you convince Erdogan and Turkey to accept Sweden, and when will you travel to Ankara?
So first of all, we have to remember that all allies, also Turkey, invited Sweden to become a full member. That happened at the at the NATO summit last year in Madrid. And so far, this has been a very quick accession process, because Finland and Sweden applied in May. Already in June, both Finland and Sweden were invited. Finland is already a full-fledged member, and I'm confident, of course, that also Sweden will be a member. And then we are working for that to happen as early as possible. My message is that Swedish membership, full-fledged membership of NATO, it's good for Sweden, it's good for the Nordic countries, for Norway, for the Baltic region, but it's also good for the whole of NATO. This will strengthen NATO, make NATO stronger, and that's of course also good for Turkey and all other allies. And again, the important decision to invite Turkey happened last year, and that has also put Sweden in a much safer and stronger place. Sweden, as an invitee to the alliance, after the decision to invite them last summer, Sweden is now integrating more and more into NATO structures, our military structures, our civilian structures, and several allies also provided bilateral security assurances for Sweden. So it's absolutely inconceivable that there will be any threat or any attack against Sweden without NATO reacting. I will travel to Ankara in the near future. Exactly when is not yet decided.
On Ukrainian membership, Mr. Stoltenberg, are you optimistic that allies will agree on a stronger language, meaning that you can give some concrete steps for Ukraine in order to achieve the membership?
So I'm confident that we will find consensus on the way forward, and we have had good informal discussions already. And we agree on some core messages. So as late as last year, all allies agreed that Ukraine will become a member of this alliance. And we are making concrete steps, because Ukraine is moving towards NATO, meaning that they are coming closer and closer, meaning that they are moving from Soviet standards to NATO standards, equipment, doctrines, and we are helping them doing that as we speak. And we have done it since 2014. So Ukraine is much closer to NATO now than just a few years ago. And of course, after the full-fledged invasion last year, with a substantial military support, including training, we are helping Ukraine to move closer to NATO membership. So when allies now start to, for instance, train them to use fourth-generation NATO standard aircraft, that helps them to actually be able to operate modern aircrafts, but it also helps them to come closer to NATO doctrines and interoperability. So yes, we are moving, and yes, all allies agree that Ukraine will become a member.
Mr. Stoltenberg, yesterday you drew a line from the terrorist attack in Norway in 2011 and compared it to Russia's attack on Ukraine. Is it your opinion that the missile attacks on Kiev, for instance, are acts of terror from Russia?
So deliberate attacks on civilians is a war crime. And there is a line between what we saw here in Norway on the 22nd of July 2011 and a war aggression against a sovereign independent nation, Ukraine. Because the intention is the same, and that is to use force, illegal force, to obtain political goals. And therefore, I think it's also extremely important that those who are responsible are held accountable for war crimes, and that also the International Criminal Court has the capabilities and is able to conduct the necessary investigations to establish the fact, to collect proof, because those responsible for war crimes in Ukraine must be held accountable.
Agency. I would like to ask about your decision regarding the sending additional troops to Kosovo, as well as keeping a battalion ready. Is it means that NATO thinks that there will be no common ground reached by the sides of the conflict soon, and also NATO prepares for an evolvement of the clashes to a bigger conflict like Russia's war in Ukraine?
So what we have seen in Kosovo is increased tensions, and we have also seen the violence against NATO peacekeepers, the KFOR forces. And this is totally unacceptable, unprovoked violence against peacekeepers from NATO with a clear UN mandate. And of course, NATO will remain vigilant. We will be there to ensure a safe and secure environment and also to calm down and reduce the tensions. To ensure that we have the forces we need at any time, we have decided to deploy our operational reserve, and I thank allies for providing troops to that reserve, but also to make ready an additional reserve force so we can deploy even more. So the first deployment of extra troops will be around 700, and they are on their way. But of course, this does not mean that we are giving up on a political solution. Our message, both to Belgrade and to Pristina, is that they have to engage in good faith in the EU-facilitated dialogue. That's the only path to peace. But at the same time, NATO has the responsibility to ensure stability in Kosovo, and that's the reason why we have been there for many years and why we now are increasing our presence in the region.
Yes, the other day you said that Ukraine has the right to defend itself. On the question of how you react to possible Ukraine attacks on Russian soil. Based on that statement and also signals from other NATO countries concerning attacks on Russian soil, is there a shift in NATO now on how you regard possible Ukraine or Ukraine-affiliated attacks on Moscow, for instance, within NATO?
We have exactly the same position now as we had at the beginning of the war, and that is that Ukraine has the right to defend itself. Russia's war aggression against Ukraine is a blatant violation of international law. The right of self-defense is enshrined in the UN Charter, and there is no doubt what this is. This is a war aggression by President Putin and Moscow against Ukraine, and Ukraine has the right to defend itself. President Putin, Moscow started this war, and they can end this war. And that's the way to create peace and stability and to ensure no further escalation of the war. So we support Ukraine. We will continue to support Ukraine. We'll stand by Ukraine for as long as it takes. And that does not make NATO and NATO allies party to the conflict. We have the right to support Ukraine without becoming a party to the conflict. And of course, fundamentally, NATO has two tasks in this conflict. One is to provide support to Ukraine, as we do. The other is to prevent this conflict in Ukraine, the Russian war aggression against Ukraine, to escalate beyond Ukraine. And that's the reason why we have increased our military presence in the eastern part of the alliance on NATO territory, with land forces, air forces, naval forces, to remove any room for misunderstanding, miscalculation in Moscow about NATO's readiness to protect every inch of NATO territory. The reason why we do that is, of course, to prevent escalation beyond Ukraine.
My question is, in particular, when it comes to support for Ukraine and long-term support for Ukraine, what kind of specific long-term commitments are you looking for from the member states?
Well, I expect that at the meeting today we will discuss long-term support for Ukraine, and then I expect that when we meet in Vilnius, where we are going to make the decisions in July, I expect that allies will agree a long-term plan, a multi-year commitment to support Ukraine. Because what we need is to ensure that when the war ends, that Ukraine has the capabilities, the strength to defend itself, and NATO allies will of course provide different types of military support, but NATO is also now looking into how we can help them to implement this important transition from old-type Soviet-era doctrines, ammunition standards, equipment to modern NATO equipment and standards. This transition has started, but when you look at the battlefield in Ukraine, you see that there is still a long way to go to ensure that everything they do is totally interoperable with NATO. So to help them to do this transition to NATO standards, to modernize the defense and security institutions. This I expect will be this multi-year commitment by NATO allies, and including a package of different types of support with more solid funding. This comes, of course, on top of the bilateral military aid that allies have committed for many years. Norway is an example of a country that has actually agreed to a 5-year program to provide both economic but also military support to Ukraine. Other allies have now followed the example of Norway and started to provide multi-year program support commitment to Ukraine.
Secretary General, what will you say this time to President Erdogan in Ankara, and will you travel to Viktor Orban as well in Hungary?
Well, my message has been since last fall, and I will reiterate that it is in the interest of the whole of NATO to have Sweden as a full member. My message is also that Sweden is already very close to NATO, and that Sweden is in a much stronger position after the decision to invite Sweden, and that was the decision also Turkey supported when we made the decision last June. I will also highlight the fact that as of today, the 1st of June, new counter-terrorism laws have come into force in Sweden. And these laws actually makes a difference. And they demonstrate that Sweden is now taking new steps to step up the fight against terrorism, including, for instance, PKK, which is a terrorist organization not only based on the assessment of Ankara and Turkey, but also by Sweden, the European Union, and many others. And therefore, I welcome both the stronger laws, which are now coming into force in Sweden on the 1st of June, but I also welcome the fact that the cooperation between Sweden and Turkey has been strengthened, and that will also be a part of my message, that actually Sweden has demonstrated that Sweden is delivering on this trilateral memorandum that was signed in Madrid, and the fact that Sweden has delivered on those commitments just highlights the importance of making sure that Sweden becomes an ally as soon as possible. Let me also add that we have to remember that Turkey has some legitimate security concerns because no other ally has suffered more terrorist attacks than Turkey. And therefore it is important that we work together with Turkey to fight terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. And therefore I welcome what NATO allies do, but also what Sweden has done over the last months to step up the fight against terrorism and the cooperation with Turkey.
Thank you very much. Hungary.
Well, I'm confident that also Hungary will ratify the accession protocol.
Thank you very much, colleague.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to gather all my colleagues here today in the City Hall of Oslo. I believe that assistance to Ukraine will be the main focus in the meeting today. Just today, or this night, some children were killed in Ukraine. And there is a very important reminder, I think, to all of us how we can step up military assistance to Ukraine so they can take back their own country. I also very much appreciated the Secretary General's message this morning about that he's paying a visit to Turkey. It's time for Sweden to join now. They have been waiting for a very long period of time, and we really need them into the alliance. This will also strengthen the alliance as a whole. On the Norwegian responsibility within the alliance, I will focus on our military presence in the high north, and also our responsibility to protect critical energy infrastructure. So I believe also that we will have a good discussion, frank discussion, and demonstrate Allied unity. So thank you.
Concerning Sweden's accession, how disappointed are you that you won't be able to make progress on Sweden's accession here in Oslo? And maybe from a Norwegian perspective, why is it so important that Sweden actually joins NATO?
Well, this is an informal ministerial meeting, so we cannot really take decisions during this meeting. So I didn't have that kind of expectations in front of this meeting either. But I really much want to focus that I expect Sweden to be a member soon. This means a lot for the alliance as a whole, but also for the security within this region. And Swedish membership will strengthen also the security of Turkey and also Hungary. Thank you.
Real pleasure to be here in Oslo for the informal meeting of the NATO's foreign ministers. For me, as a Swedish foreign minister, of course, the obvious thing to talk about is the Swedish accession to NATO. And I expect today to be able to deliver the clear message to the whole NATO alliance that Sweden has fulfilled all the commitments that we undertook at the Madrid summit last year, including the new terrorism legislation that today, the 1st of June, have entered into force in Sweden, following a decision of the Swedish Parliament on the 3rd of May. With this, everything that we undertook to deliver during the Madrid summit is fulfilled, and it is time for Turkey and Hungary to start the ratification of the Swedish membership to NATO. That is the clear message that I will send, and I have already received before this meeting, clear signs of the commitment and the support that we feel from several of the NATO member states. And I believe that this will be reinforced during today's meeting as well. Thank you, and I'm now open to questions.
Your Turkish counterpart is not participating in today's meeting. Are you somehow disappointed that you want to achieve a major step forward in your accession path?
No, this is an informal meeting of foreign ministers. There is no decisions to be taken as such. This is a meeting in the run-up to the meeting in Vilnius. But my Turkish counterpart isn't here. It's quite natural given that they have just had elections. The really important thing for Sweden will be the meeting in the permanent joint mechanism, the mechanism that was set up as part of a trilateral memorandum that was signed during Madrid. Such a meeting will now follow in the weeks after this meeting here in Oslo. The participants will be Sweden, Finland and Turkey, and at that meeting, of course, we will be able to follow up on the trilateral memorandum and be able to tick off all the commitments that Sweden have done. Following that meeting, the ratification will happen.
You've said several times that time has come for Hungary and Turkey. Isn't frustration growing now in Sweden that this isn't going to happen maybe before Vilnius?
First of all, this was never a sprint, it's a marathon, and we now see the end of it. So no, I feel that with the backing that we feel and the support from the NATO alliance, after all, we saw the swiftest ratification in the NATO family following Sweden's letter of intent and the summit in Madrid last year. And we see that the ratification has already been done by all NATO member states, bar Turkey and Hungary.
What is your reaction to Jens Stoltenberg traveling to Ankara? And what talks are planned between Sweden and Turkey?
First of all, I can only view such a visit as something positive, of course. As for Sweden's discussions, they will take place within the part of a permanent joint mechanism, because this is the fora that was set up following the signing of the trilateral memorandum. It is at that spot, it is at that mechanism that we will have a focus on the fulfillment of Sweden's commitments following the memorandum. Well, first of all, I think that we all understand the differences between Ukraine, a country that is at war and has large parts of its territory occupied, and Sweden, who have been declared as an invitee by the NATO alliance. I mean, there is a clear difference there. Of course, we support the open door policy, and we do this also with regard to Ukraine. After all, it is the open door policy that has meant that Sweden can become a member. I would also like to underline that, of course, in the run-up to Vilnius, it is important to underline that everything bar Sweden's joining to NATO would, of course, be viewed as a win for Putin.
Tobias. Yeah. Good morning. Today I'm really waiting for the discussions to prepare the Vilnius summit. And of course the main topic is what is going to happen with Ukraine. And we very clearly support the idea to give a very clear path to Ukraine to entering to NATO as a full member. I'm in a position that NATO is a clear and strong security guarantee for Ukraine after the war. And we must give a very strong message that there won't be any gray zones anymore in the neighboring of Russia. And I hope this discussion leads us to consensus about that for the NATO summit taking place in Vilnius. So Ukraine needs to get a clear path and the next steps how to enter to NATO. This is our very clear position.
How divided are allies on this issue?
We're not divided. We came here to Oslo to have informal and open discussions, and I see the way that we are able to form the clear message about the clear path to Ukraine. I see the will, of course, to support Ukraine, and as well the understanding that we must secure the stability and we must give the strong defense guarantees to Ukraine, but also to us. NATO is a clear security guarantee, which is working, which has plans, which has capabilities. We support Ukraine on political level and also in military, and we will keep going to do that, but we have to think as well what is the new architecture for our security in our region. And Estonian position is clear. This is NATO and NATO membership, because we have seen from the history what actually we said 15 years ago for Ukraine as well, that you are welcome to NATO. But we had this gray zones policy continuing, and we see results. We saw it in 2008 in Georgia, we saw it in 2014 in Ukraine, also it started again last year with full-scale war in Europe, and the genocide and deportation of children. So we must understand that this is our responsibility as well to give the clear path for Ukraine and also for us to make clear positions. Where are the lines for the future? And also this is a clear message to Putin and to Russia. They know and understand only the clear language. So that's our position. And also our friend, the Swedish Foreign Minister Tobias is here. I'm really glad about that. And I'm really hopeful that Sweden will become full member for the NATO summit in Vilnius. We are very happy about welcoming Sweden already here today with these informal discussions.
What's your opinion on the continued delay of Sweden's accession?
There are some logical processes, and we had Turkey elections just recently, but now it's a time to make things clear, because Sweden is ready to join, has fulfilled all the criteria, there's no question about that. And as an Estonian foreign minister, I say that the Finnish and the Swedish people's decision to join the NATO shows as well all that this neutrality policy of the security, it's done. Now there is a clear word. This NATO membership is a guarantee for everybody as a security matter. Of course, the war is going on. It's a hot conflict. Ukraine is fighting not only for their freedom, but also for us and also for our values about territorial integrity. This is very important to talk about as well, the aggression crimes, which is not today's topic, but this is very important that we re-establish the international rules we based on. And this is correct, the right time to talk about the future, because we have decided to continuously support Ukraine on political level, militarily, but also now it's a time to keep the guarantees and the clear path. What is the future, the next steps, not only repeating the Bucharest language. So this is exactly the right time.
What is your message to Turkey now in regards to Sweden's membership?
We have been very clear from since beginning that Sweden is welcome to NATO. Every country and nation must have the right and opportunity to make their own decisions. There is no practical and argumented reasons why Sweden cannot be the member of NATO, and we are very clear about that. And I hope that the freshly re-elected President Erdogan will do the steps for the NATO summit in Vilnius. As you see, I'm very confident. I'm here and I'm together with my partners. So we are having open discussion. This is informal meeting, and during our bilateral meetings, there is great interest to find a common understanding, and everybody is understanding this. This is somehow like historical moment to rebuild or to think through the new architecture for our region about security. So I'm very, very optimistic about that. So, thank you.
You enjoyed the day yesterday?
It's good, very good. Yeah, very, very good.
Good morning. It's always a pleasure to join our colleagues from across the Alliance. We will continue to focus on the issues that we've been discussing recently, how we ensure that Vladimir Putin's aggression against Ukraine is unsuccessful, how we strengthen our alliance, how we work to welcome Sweden into our numbers in the very near future, whilst also ensuring that NATO remains a strong defensive alliance to support all the members within it. That's what we're working on today, obviously in preparation for the leader-level summit in Vilnius. And I very much thank our Norwegian hosts for providing this amazing backdrop to what is going to be a very important set of meetings. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Mélanie Joly, Foreign Minister from Canada. It's a pleasure to see you this morning. So, of course, we already know that when Putin first invaded Ukraine, he thought he would divide NATO, and he was wrong. And he thought that he could attack European security and global security without consequences, and he was wrong. NATO is more united than ever. Now, we're happy that Finland is now part of NATO, and we call on Turkey and Hungary to accept and ratify Finland's accession to NATO without delay. Time is of the essence. At the same time, Canada has been there since the beginning of the war, and even before. We've invested at this point more than $5 billion Canadian. And we will be there even after Ukraine's victory. We already know that even after Ukraine's victory, Russia will still be a very dangerous neighbor to Ukraine. And in that sense, Canada and I will be talking a lot in the coming hours about the importance of bringing long-term security commitments to Ukraine. Because we need to make sure that we don't allow Russia to retool and reinvade. And we also know that there will be lots of private and public investments linked to the reconstruction of Ukraine. And in that sense, investors will want to have confidence that their investments are safe. And so we need to think about short-term, mid-term, but also in the long run. And so that's why we will be addressing the issue of long-term security for Ukraine in the coming hours. Donc, ça me fait plaisir aussi de commenter en français. Essentiellement, nous allons parler de la question des garanties de sécurité à long terme pour l'Ukraine, parce que nous savons que même après la victoire de l'Ukraine, même après tous les efforts que nous avons et nous allons déployer, ça va être très, très important au final qu'on empêche la Russie de se réorganiser et de permettre l'invasion à nouveau de l'Ukraine. Alors, c'est pourquoi nous allons parler au cours des prochaines heures de l'importance de s'engager à long terme. And last point, for the first time in Canada's history, today we're announcing sanctions to support Moldova's democracy. So we will be targeting Russian oligarchs that are trying to meddle into Moldova's democracy. Thank you so much. Well, we call on Turkey to make sure that they ratify. Same for Hungary. We've had many conversations, and I will continue to call on these two countries to do so. Canada has been involved since the beginning, even last summer, in these discussions, particularly with Finland, particularly with Sweden, but also with Turkey and Hungary directly. And I'm confident that we can get to a deal. Well, Canada's position on Ukraine's accession to NATO has always been clear. We've always been in favor. Of course, we need to make sure that there is a consensus, but we'll have a strong position.
When do you expect Turkey to accept Sweden's membership?
Sorry, I didn't hear.
At what point, when do you expect Turkey to accept Sweden's membership? Do you expect it to happen before Vilnius?
Well, time is of the essence. That's why I'm telling you that we are calling on Turkey and Hungary to do that, and we'll continue to put pressure. Oui? Oui? Mais pour nous, il va de soi que c'est important que l'Ukraine puisse avoir accès à de l'équipement militaire, à de la formation militaire. Le Canada, vous savez, même avant l'invasion, nous avions formé 30 000 militaires ukrainiens. Ce qui a fait partie du succès sur le terrain des Ukrainiens afin de contrer l'offensive de la Russie. Alors, c'est ce que je parle, des garanties très concrètes sur le terrain, au niveau militaire, en premier lieu, mais aussi d'un point de vue humanitaire, d'un point de vue soutien à la démocratie et à la réforme aussi de l'État ukrainien, et au niveau de l'appui financier pour financer, dans le fond, les services de l'État. Merci. Thank you so much.
So we are closing up to Vilnius summit, and I hope that today's discussion will bring us closer to consensus on especially what to provide Ukraine. And of course, we need to have a debate on how to get Sweden into NATO. I wish that in Vilnius they could also be a full member of NATO.
What will you tell your Hungarian and Turkish colleagues about the path of Sweden?
I will be speaking to other 30 colleagues. I am not speaking only to one. So this is my vision for NATO Vilnius summit, and we need to be working on that.
Why exactly are you confident that Sweden will be a member of NATO by the Vilnius summit?
I'm not saying I'm confident. I'm saying this is my wish list, that Sweden will be in and that we will provide a credible path for Ukraine membership in NATO.
What should be the language when it is communicating on Ukrainian membership and the path to accession?
So this is the exactly working debate we have, and I cannot provide further details since this is really something which is changing all the time. But my position here is clear. I think the position of many Eastern and Central European countries on that is pretty clear. So I'm patient and I explain the interest of my country, how I see the future of European security. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Bon, vous savez que nous nous réunissons à un moment qui est important pour la sécurité de l'Europe. Et nous sommes ici essentiellement pour préparer le sommet des chefs d'État et de gouvernement de Vilnius, qui vient dans quelques semaines. Évidemment, nous nous réunissons, je l'ai dit, à un moment qui est particulier. Donc la guerre que fait la Russie à l'Ukraine sera très largement au centre de nos conversations, même si ce sont des conversations informelles et que l'on abordera beaucoup d'autres sujets. Nous voulons envoyer sur le sujet de l'Ukraine, comme sur les autres, un message de cohésion. C'est indispensable, d'unité, mais aussi de responsabilité. Nous devons collectivement être à la hauteur des défis qui se présentent à nos pays et à notre sécurité collective. Alors pour revenir à l'Ukraine, je pense que vous avez tous entendu le discours du président de la République hier à Bratislava. Ici, je plaiderai moi-même pour un soutien renforcé à ce pays et aussi pour que nos pays réfléchissent ensemble aux garanties de sécurité qu'ils pourraient apporter à l'Ukraine, qui par ailleurs doit cheminer vers l'adhésion à l'Alliance Atlantique. Je dois rappeler un principe simple du droit international qui est que tous les États souverains ont le droit de choisir librement leurs alliances. Nous sommes attachés au respect de ce principe. Donc voilà un premier sujet. Ce ne sera pas le seul. Il y a aussi évidemment la question de l'adhésion de la Suède à l'OTAN. La France considère que, tout comme l'adhésion de la Finlande qui a été faite, l'adhésion de la Suède va renforcer notre sécurité, tant européenne que collective. Donc nous y sommes favorables et nous aimerions que la Suède puisse nous rejoindre comme membre plein et entier, pas seulement comme pays observateur comme elle le sera aujourd'hui, à Vilnius, et que ce soit donc chose faite d'ici Vilnius. Voilà. Je veux évoquer aussi brièvement, bien sûr, la question du Kosovo. Nous en avons parlé hier lors de nos premiers entretiens, nous en reparlerons certainement aujourd'hui. C'est une situation préoccupante qui mérite que l'on appelle les deux parties à la responsabilité, et en particulier, je dois le dire, dans les circonstances actuelles, la partie kosovare. Mais pour les uns, comme pour les autres, nous devons leur rappeler que le sens des responsabilités qui accompagnent leur souhait de rejoindre l'Union européenne signifie qu'ils doivent agir différemment, rechercher une normalisation de leurs relations, s'abstenir évidemment de tout acte de violence et de tout ce qui peut être de nature à alimenter des tensions qui doivent impérativement cesser.
Here, please.